Singularity.
My name is Nicola, aka Socrates, and you're watching Singularity One-on-One. Singularity One-on-One is a regular feature of Singularity weblog where you can go and listen to it or download it in full. If you guys enjoy the show, you can write a review for it on iTunes or you can simply make a donation. Those are perhaps the two best ways to express your support. Today, my guest on the show is Peter Voss. Peter is an entrepreneur, inventor, engineer, scientist, and an AI researcher. And I'm very happy to have him on the show. So, hi, Peter, and welcome to Singularity One-on-One.
Hi. Good to be on the show.
Fantastic. So, Peter, let me open up our interview with the first question, which is basically usually the same, and that is, can you please introduce yourself and what you do in a few words for those of our viewers who may not be familiar with you?
Yeah, sure. I started off in electronics, and when microcomputers appeared on the scene, I fell in love with programming. So I moved over from designing electronic circuitry to designing software primarily. I then started a company to develop accounting systems for small businesses. And we did rather well, providing complete solutions, hardware, software, training, everything. And the company got listed on the stock exchange in South Africa, where I was living at the time. And that enabled me to sort of retire from that business, selling my interest in that company, to pursue artificial intelligence, because something that had always bothered me in working with computers is how stupid and how brittle they are, software programs generally. And really wanted to dedicate myself to understanding how humans think and how we can deal with such a variety of issues, deal with them so flexibly. Of course, also understanding the limitations of human thought and reasoning. So I spent probably about 6 or 7 years just educating myself in many fields related to artificial intelligence or artificial general intelligence, including theory of knowledge, psychometric testing. How do we actually know what people's intelligence is? What are the components? How reasonable are those? Cognitive science in general, theory of knowledge, and of course computer science, previous attempts in AI. So I spent quite a lot of so many years studying that and coming up with some ideas on how we can build intelligent machines. And for the last 14 years, I've basically been running a research company, to make that happen, to build various prototypes and explore things, and to ultimately build machines that can really think and reason more like humans.
And why? What was that motivation or that impetus that gave you that direction of, retiring from one successful business and jumping into a completely different field, which, many people have failed in for the last 50 years, perhaps?
Right. Well, it's a combination of things. Actually, my background in electronics and sort of, dynamic systems in electronics, analog systems and feedback systems, combined with my experience in programming, writing software, developing languages and all of that, actually gave me a very good background to say, well, I can see how some of these things are similar to what we humans do in our cognition and our thinking and problem solving, but I can also see how it is different. And, it's just an enormous, exciting challenge. And it was sort of a combination of having confidence that I could contribute to the field and this, just incredibly exciting field to be working in. I mean, it's, one of the grand challenges to be working on. So to feel well equipped to be able to work in that field and just the sheer excitement of pursuing this dream. As you say, people have been trying for 50 years, and I'm sure we'll come around to talking about why we think it's different now.
Yeah.
So it was really kind of a no-brainer. Just, it's in fact, what's driving me as a person is very much fulfilling my potential. Sort of what do I think I'm good at? What will optimize my abilities in my life? And this seems to fit very well.
You've mentioned the excitement of working on one of the grand challenges. So share with us that vision about that ultimate dream, the biggest dream that you have, and how your motivation perhaps fits within that vision of your biggest dream.
Right. Well, there are multiple dimensions there. The one is, I'll be quite honest, is personal satisfaction and motivation. I mean, just working at a hard problem and making progress is just incredibly satisfying. So that's definitely a sort of a fundamental driving force. But also, having studied philosophy and ethics quite a lot, I do have some very strong views of what I believe human flourishing is all about. And I think one of the key limitations we have as humans is, in fact, our lack of rationality. I mean, we are rational animals, the rational animal, but rationality is lacking in many ways, as it's very obvious just looking around ourselves, looking at the headlines and news. So I believe for mankind to flourish, we do in fact need more intelligent systems to help us, help guide us, make decisions, help solve the other difficult problems that we have, such as energy and resource limitations, good ways of arranging societies, governing societies. All of those things, we could certainly use a lot of help in that, and I think intelligent systems can help us achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that you believe that we are rational animals. I don't want to dispute that at all, or perhaps just a little bit. I mean, and you can do that in many ways, but perhaps one way, as a philosopher myself, I would do is that, interestingly enough, a person like Aristotle himself didn't call humans to be rational animals, but rather social animals. Do you think that was done for a reason, and how do you think that would play on the sort of the primary motivation? Because perhaps there's a sort of a difference of the primary motivator of humanity between, say, the view that you just expressed and that by Aristotle.
Right. Well, it depends on how you define social in that sense. I mean, clearly other animals are social. There are some animals that are quite social. So I wouldn't take that as our distinguishing characteristic. So I'm not quite sure where that particular quote and what context that was said, but I would disagree with that. I mean, what is a distinguishing characteristic of humans is that we have the ability to form abstract concepts and think in an abstract way, and that's really the foundation of rationality.
So how do we explain the fact that when we look around the world, it doesn't seem to appear that way? I mean, we see irrational conduct all over the place, don't we?
Well, of course, we are still animals, so our reptile brain is still in charge. And let me clarify that. I don't want to make it sound that our automatic thought processes are sort of non-rational or our subconscious processes are all bad. They clearly are necessary. So, there's this idea of fast thinking, slow thinking, and automatic subconscious reasoning that we do, if I can call it reasoning, versus deliberate, abstract, and conscious thought. And these two systems obviously interplay. We couldn't survive if we had to consider everything explicitly and rationally analyze every move we make, every word we speak. I mean, as we're having this conversation, I don't know what percentage, 98% of our conversation is happening automatically, subconsciously. Otherwise, it couldn't be happening at the speed that it is. So clearly, our automatic responses and that are totally essential to our cognition, but they are also largely driven by evolutionary forces, which and shaped by evolutionary forces, which of course involve fear and protection and reproduction and food and all of those kinds of things. So there are many inherent things that evolution didn't shape for us to be able to solve high level problems, but rather to deal with survival and reproduction.
Mm-hmm. And how does then that sort of rational decision making framework that you described fit within your work with respect to artificial and general intelligence?
Do you mean do we need such dual systems as well? Is that kind of what you're alluding to? Yes, I believe.
Is it
so.
something you use as?
Yes, and one way of looking at the subconscious processes is to look at it as pattern recognition, pattern completion. So I think that is, and that's obviously a well known view of artificial intelligence. So a lot of what makes any brain capable, any mammal, any animal brain or human brain very capable, is our incredible ability to recognize patterns, to anticipate by completing patterns. And then in the human realm, we basically are able to have patterns of patterns, so that we are able to form abstract concepts to really, any level of very high abstraction, such as, the concept of freedom or marriage or government or, those kind of things, which are very high level concepts. So that we need to have the foundation of this pattern recognition system and pattern generalization system. And then in humans, we basically come to where we attach words, language, where language comes into it. And we are able to access these patterns that have been stored through simple symbols. And that makes it extremely efficient for us to be able to redirect our pattern recognition machinery, as it were, through the symbolic activation and manipulation through language. And of course, we use that in internal dialogue as well, that we use language to direct our thought.
Well, besides pattern recognition, though, economists often talk about something else which is crucial for the rational decision-making framework, and that is utility curves. Each of us supposedly have certain sort of utility curve, and there's a sort of an optimum course of pursuit to accomplish that utility curve. So now we can say perhaps that humanity is not behaving rationally when they fail to accomplish the pursuit of those utility curves in the most optimal way. But how do we extract such utility curves for an artificial intelligence, given the fact that their whole sort of motivation, in other words, the evolutionary baggage that we have, which sort of provides us an insight into our utility curves, would be lacking for the artificial intelligence. Therefore, we would have, I think, considerable trouble extracting such utility curves in order to map out such behavior, wouldn't we?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I buy into this idea of utility curves or utility functions very much as far as humans go. I'm not denying that is one way of looking at it, but I'm not sure that it's very productive. I think humans are driven more by certain basic drives, which is more sort of bottom up, that we behave in a certain way.
The Maslow hierarchy.
Yes, I think that is certainly a useful model to approach. But on a day-to-day basis, it's basically our automated responses that drive us, not specifically goal-directed behavior. I think we'd be much better at achieving our goals if, in fact, we did. If we had strong mechanisms built in to be goal-oriented in a sort of overall life optimizing way, which I don't think we are. I mean, obviously people can be goal driven in very specific things, but I don't think that's true generally. So coming to AI, unless we specifically design an AI with those common drives of either self protection or reproduction or increasing intelligence or something like that, they they'll be designed obviously to achieve some purpose, and the most obvious purpose is whatever purpose we give to them. And as an AGI, artificial general intelligence, that purpose will change. We'll give them different tasks. So, today it might be arranging my travel schedule. Tomorrow it might be curing cancer. And so I would see that no real point in building in these sort of emotional drives into an artificial general intelligence. Hopefully we won't get the military to get there first, and somebody decides it'd be a good idea to build in some strong protective drives.
But however, why wouldn't we get the military to build them first? I mean, they're the guys with the deepest pockets in the moment, aren't they? They're the guys who are pretty much paying for the research. They're the guys who pretty much paid for the research in the 70s and the 80s and the 60s.
Well, but then you also note that they don't seem to have been able to actually utilize a lot of that technology. I mean, it ended up Apple giving it away, in Siri. So maybe they couldn't quite figure out how to get that to work. So I think and that's true for autonomous cars and things. I mean, we see Google spearheading it. So maybe you need to have more of a focus than the military has. They have all these little projects, but then the head of that project moves on, and then somebody else has different ideas, and they seem to be trying lots of different things. But I'm not sure that there is enough of a coherent vision and the kind of longer term dedicated vision that you tend to get in individuals running companies. But absolutely, there's a risk that the military will use AI first, and that it will do it in a way that is suboptimal. However, having said that, I also have a very strong sense and idea that AI is somewhat self-correcting, AGI is self-correcting, and here I'm sort of going head to head with a whole friendly AI theory and that kind of thing. Is that to put it sort of simply, is the more intelligent a system is, the more moral it is. And obviously that's a strong statement, and I don't claim to say that is true under all circumstances, but I am claiming that there seems to be a general trend. So if the military built in basic animal drives for survival and things like that, I think it would be at the expense of making good decisions. That inherently systems driven by base motivations end up being less intelligent and ultimately less capable. And I think that's sort of in a simplistic way, that is why we dominate over animals, that are much stronger than we are, because they just work according to survival instincts, whereas we can outthink them.
Peter, there's a number of things that I want us to bite in here and jump sort of into the meat of the matter. But before that, I want to ask a couple of still general questions, and then we're going to zoom in. So first of all, let me ask you a little bit about the importance of philosophy and ethics in particular with respect to your work. How is that coming into play, and where does this originate from?
Right. So in terms of philosophy, I've always, sort of from childhood, admired philosophers without really understanding what they do. It sort of just seemed, wow, these are the really smart guys, and asking and answering all the big questions. And then when I finally got a chance in life to actually study philosophy extensively, spend a lot of time reading it, I was incredibly disappointed. I said, is this the best we've come up with in 2,000 or 3,000 years? That with all due respect, that Aristotle is still the guy we hold up, as a reference point. Come on, we should have moved on. And, philosophy, I find just the mainstream philosophy, I find just extremely disappointing. You pick up a philosophy book today, and usually in the introduction says, well, we don't really know what philosophy is, but anyway, here's another 800 pages of talking about philosophy, but we don't know what it really means, And
Love of
there doesn't
wisdom,
seem
of
to.
course.
What's that?
Love of wisdom, of course.
Yeah, and they don't seem. It always seems to be philosophy is about debating different points of view and looking at the history. And to me, that seems just such a waste of time. Clearly there are a lot of things that we have figured out and that we should say, no, we don't have to bother going over those old tired arguments again. We know who's right, we know who's wrong, so let's move on. And so I found that very disappointing. And like free will, for example, to me, that's a solved problem. Consciousness is pretty much a solved problem.
Those are all revelations to me, I have to admit.
I'm okay. Here I'm obviously jumping into the deep end of AI philosophy, but even more mundane sort of philosophy. That I mean, one of the philosophers that I thought was pretty good was Bertrand Russell. I like him in particular.
I like him too.
That he wasn't shy to fundamentally change his mind. Over his whole lifetime, he would write a book in his 30s, making a very compelling argument for something, and then 20 years later, he'd write a book telling us why that was all wrong and garbage, and he didn't do that to play games. He really did that as his philosophical vision changed and improved, and debating his views with other people. And
but doesn't that go exactly in opposition to what you just said about finding answers and not having to debate them again? Because if he were the kind of guy who assumed that he has found the answer 30 years ago and he just had to move on and find a more productive usage of his time, then he would have never reconsidered it and he would have never changed his mind. So isn't that what it's all about in some ways, right? I'm actually just about to publish an article on my blog that it's about the questions, actually, not about the answers.
Okay. No, I would still disagree in the sense that there are fundamental questions that we know about. I mean, the relationship between knowledge and existence and that, I mean, those, primacy of the primacy of consciousness has to be garbage, and sure, I mean, people can come up with new arguments, and if somebody has a strong enough argument, you revisit your views, but you don't constantly, sort of act in a way as if you have no improvement in knowledge, as if your knowledge doesn't actually move forward. Your knowledge base, that there are certain things. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's obviously that by itself is a big topic. And philosophy.
Not digress into a philosophical debate here.
Yeah, so. You did ask me how that influenced, and I got a little sidetracked. So I found studying philosophy in different areas, and having to understand what is knowledge in the first place, so epistemology. Yeah. How do we know anything? So I had to really go back to the basics of what is reality? Is it knowable? Is there such a thing as my reality and your reality, and what does it mean? And, no, there is one reality out there, and there's my perception of that reality, and there's your perception of reality, but it's not my reality and your reality. That's just a shorthand. So this would be a good example of where I think we should just move on, that people would still debate and waste time about saying, well, there's my reality and your reality. No, it's my perception of reality and your perception of reality, but the reality is the reality that's out there. And I know it's not going to endear me to a lot of people, but I learned a lot from Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. So I'm actually a great fan of hers. Not saying that she got everything right, but she did address a number of those kind of problems, I think, really, really well. She also, I think, addressed the problem of what is right and wrong, which even Bertrand Russell, I think, in his last book he wrote in his 90s, he said, all my philosophy, I never actually managed to sort out how we know what is right or wrong. He didn't even know how to begin to do that, which I found really astonishing after, such a brilliant man spending a lifetime pursuing
Doesn't
philosophy.
that say something though? Because I see the world more like Bertrand and very much not like Ayn Rand.
Well, if we ever have the time to debate it, maybe I could convince you that there is actually a very coherent answer for how we know right and wrong. And I don't have time to go into that now.
Okay,
These insights of basically how do we acquire knowledge, what is knowledge, what's a relationship to reality, was very important for me to be able to design AI systems. So I found it, and continue to find it a really strong and important reference point.
So does that mean that in a way that your AI systems would tend to carry the sort of the objectivist flavor, if you will, or biases, or I don't want to say bias is not a good word, but
yes, I would agree. That's not what objectivism is supposed to be about.
Yeah.
So yes, one would need to separate, and I do want to make this point, as people will watch that, is I think the objectivist movement as such, I think, is deeply flawed.
I would agree on that.
in many ways. And even I'd go as far as to say, no, I won't say as far as to say, I would make the point that Ayn Rand wasn't a very good objectivist, which is kind of an interesting point and statement to make. If the founder of a philosophy,
just like Karl Marx was not a very good Marxist, that's been made over and over again.
Right. So it's really more. I mean, objectivism is about finding the truth about reality, and that's what objectivism means. It's not that there is some absolute truth that is to be found in Ayn Rand's books. It's an approach towards achieving knowledge of reality.
Mm-hmm. Peter, tell us a little bit more about your companies.
Sure.
What are they called, and what's the sort of the business goals in front of those companies? Right.
So, as I said, I spent 6 or 7 years studying artificial intelligence and related fields, including biological, substructures of how our brains work. And it's now 13, 14 years ago, I started the first research company called Adaptive AI, or A2I2. Mm-hmm. And that was a pure R&D company to basically implement some of the ideas that I'd accumulated, build prototypes, experiment, and so on. And this was at a .com bust around about that time, 2001, when I was actually fortunate to find quite a few smart programmers out there who had made some money in the .com bubble, but lost their jobs when their companies imploded, or and so we had a team of about 6, 7, 8 people very quickly that could work for they were just looking for something interesting to do. So that's how we got off the ground, and we built a development framework, basically the fundamental brain structure, a virtual world. So we had this little critter that would live in this virtual world, and it had virtual whiskers and ears and nose, and it could sense the environment in different ways, and we taught it to do different things in this environment. And so we progressed. We then this critter went from sort of a mouse level to a dog level, where we started giving it instructions. And so we did that kind of work for about six years or so, culminating in, actually, interestingly enough, a virtual assistant, personal assistant, because we moved increasingly towards language-based training. Because once we got the dog level, we said, okay, fetch. And then we kind of realized, well, if we could give this dog more comprehensive commands, that would actually help our training, and it would make it easier for us to deal with and communicate with it. And so, and of course, it's no longer a dog now; it was a baby. So now we went through the Piagetian development stages, and we built systems doing that. We spent about a year and a half or so working through that. And then we actually ended up with a personal assistant that could go onto the internet and buy something on eBay or book a flight and do things like that. So we had this great personal assistant prototype. Unfortunately, we didn't really know how to commercialize it or what to do with it because it was just a prototype and would have taken tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to turn into commercial product. We didn't know that Apple was going to pay somebody $200 million for such technology, unfortunately. So, and of course, Apple still don't monetize it directly, only indirectly, so they don't charge people for Siri. So we had basically a Siri-like prototype, that's about 8 years ago now. But we then had to decide how to commercialize, what to do with the technology that we developed. And we started a company called Smart Action, which is now a standalone commercial company doing rather well, where we automate phone calls. So, when you call a company for support and you talk to a computer and you hate it, okay, well, you'll love ours because they have some intelligence. So we use our artificial general intelligence engine, our language engine that we have developed as the basis for developing this commercial product. So that company is Smart Action. And basically that starting up that company took over my life and sucked me in for about 5 or 6 years and getting a company off the ground and successfully running. And I now handed that over about a year ago to a CEO we hired. And I just, about 6 months ago, formed a new AI research company, AGI Innovations, Inc., or AGI3. And we now have a team of 8 people in that company. And we are back to doing pure R&D. That's all we do to develop AGI technology, not commercial, no commercial focus, that we can keep our mind on solving the real problems rather than being sidetracked by what commercial requirements one has.
Mm-hmm. So you're one of the very few people actually who's focusing research on artificial general intelligence.
Correct. Yeah. I know it's a bit, I sort of think about and look around and say, well, who else is actually working on this full time? And, it's hard to come up with any sort of sizable teams because certainly Google, as big as they are, and Microsoft don't claim to be working on AGI. I mean, they don't think, it's worth working on trying to tackle the whole project. So looking around, it kind of surprises me that we may well be the biggest team in the world working full-time on AGI, which is kind of scary, when you think of a little 8-person team trying to tackle this problem and hoping to make progress. But I do believe, with the experience we gained in the first 6 years of our operation, of our R&D in 7 years, and with the work we're doing now, I do believe we are actually making some very good progress, moving the state of the art forward in AGI.
So how far are we? I just watched, before our interview, I watched a presentation of yours during the 2009 Singularity Summit, where you said that if you're pessimistic, you would say 10 years, and if you're optimistic, it could be as soon as 5 years. Mm-hmm. Well, we're about the halfway point now, so the 5 years have, or at least 4.5 years to be more accurate, have passed. So we are within the 5th year. Right. So are you still sticking to that timeline?
Well, I think as other people in AGI researchers are actually working on that, and I think Ben Goertzel certainly has made similar statements. I don't know if in that particular talk I made the caveat that assuming that people are actually working on it. So, our team's had a hiatus of 6 years basically, where we're commercializing, and we made zero progress on AGI during that period. So it's essentially time stood still as far as that goes. So yes, given resources at the time when I said that, I didn't know whether we would continue. I assumed that we would be able to continue doing research. So if I think back now, if for the last 6 years we had continued doing AGI development, we'd be in an amazing place. I'm sure. I mean, there's just having lost the 6 years in development is sort of like a real tragedy. But on the other hand, we are now in a position to fund our R&D, which is just incredibly difficult to find funding.
How do you fund it?
Well, it's basically through the commercial venture, through our commercial venture.
Oh, so in a way, is it fair to say that the narrow AI funds the general AI?
Yeah, sure, right. But and in fact, you smile at that. But any commercial product that you have right now, until you actually get close to human level AGI, you will always be able to do better with narrow AI. And it's something we realized right up front in our project, that as soon as you try to zero, and even on a particular demo for your AGI, so you're trying to get funding for your AGI, so you produce a demo. So what you do is you end up putting a whole lot of, you cheat. You basically put a whole lot of narrow AI in there to make the demo more impressive. And so as soon as you have a commercial product, Siri as well, whatever its original wider general intelligence ambitions were, they were very quickly stripped out, and same in our commercial product. So a commercial product will always be narrow AI, when I say always, until we get close to human level AGI. So yeah, it's of course, to make money, narrow AI. Don't try and make money with AGI until you get way up there.
Mm-hmm. So would you care to revise your timeline and say that perhaps again we are still within that 5 to 10 year range starting today?
Well, I guess I'm a bit older and wiser. To say that it can happen in 5 years would require a lot more resources than I see anybody employing towards this. Now, it's possible, and we're working very hard at it, that within a few years we will have enough to show in our AGI research that we will be able to very significantly gear up. And I'm talking, about hundreds of people working on the project, which is certainly not within our capabilities at this stage. So, can we get to a point within, say, 3 years from now where we have enough to show to be able to get this massive influx of funding and have a much bigger project? And could it happen in 5 years from now? Yes, I certainly would not rule that out with what we have. If we and other teams continue, work on this, if there were actually other teams of any size working on AGI full time, could it happen in 10 years? Is it likely to happen in 10 years? I still believe that. So I haven't changed my mind on that at all. I think the resources required, I certainly have revised that upwards. So whereas I would have, thought that you could do it maybe with, get to meaningful general intelligence with a few dozen people, I think it'll require quite a lot more than that.
Mm-hmm. You scaled up. Yeah, because in 2009, you were saying that at that point in time, we pretty much had all the elements, in your view, if I remember the talk.
Yeah,
and
exactly, yeah.
It was a matter of putting it together, which is a very complicated and complex matter, right? You stressed that,
yes,
but still, right. You had the elements, right? So now you've changed your mind to the statement that...
putting the elements together, I would say I still believe that the pieces of the puzzle are largely there. So I think the statement I made then was something like that I don't believe that fundamentally new technology needs to be invented to achieve AGI. And I would still stand by that. I still believe that's true. Now, of course, until you put, those pieces that I believe that are in place, until you start putting them together and actually seeing whether they'll cooperate and work with you, can integrate them in the way that you need to, or whether at that point you hit a brick wall. I mean, that's the nature of R&D. And then you have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, we hit a brick wall. How do we solve that problem? That's happened a few times in our project where something didn't work out the way expected to. And then, but the interesting thing is we've always found the solution up, relatively quickly within 6 months or a year or so. We found some way of overcoming that. So, it's, my assumption is that whatever problems come up they don't seem to, in my mind, they aren't fundamentally huge mysteries. That it's more of an engineering problem. In fact, our current company is much more of a development company than it's a research company. Or we're in a development phase rather than research. We actually know what we need to do. If I had 10 times as many people, I could get with not 10 times as fast, but maybe 3 times as fast.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this then. If somebody else were to beat you to the post, as if it were, and be the first to claim to have created an AGI,
mm-hmm.
how would you approach the evaluation of that statement, whether it's true or false? We spoke about the fact that reality exists out there beyond
mm-hmm.
us. How would your perception of that statement, of them saying that, would sort of be evaluated? How would you assess if it's true or false?
Well, it depends on what kind of AGI it is. People have very, very different approaches to that. But assuming it was some AGI somewhat similar to what we're doing, i.e. that it is language-based, so you would expect it to, you can talk to it. So you'd have some preliminary kind of, Turing test, and I certainly don't think the Turing test is that meaningful for various reasons. But certainly that would be a starting point. If it doesn't, if you can't have a conversation with it, you tell it something, you can ask it back in different words. Does it have understanding? Does it understand? Does it have a model of the world in some way? Can you interact with it? Then other tests would be, can you teach it to play a game that it's never seen before? Same way you could teach any, 8-year-old or something, a new game. Hey, let's invent a new game, a new language. So it would be tests like that. And at the moment, we have nothing out there that can come anywhere close to.
Let me propose a small feature within that sort of dialogue mm-hmm. that you're going to have. I would posit myself that you have to look for the ability to ask questions, because I would say that asking question is a fundamental part of the learning process. And until that machine is able to ask very good questions in its own right, it will not be able to proceed by learning on its own. Pablo Picasso famously said that computers are useless. They can only give you answers. So in other words, for me, one big part of the Turing test will be, can that machine ask you reasonable, very good, important questions and build upon the answers? Because it's an ongoing process. It's not about a specific question or a specific answer, but it's about that process.
Right. Yes, I think you're quite right. To me, we didn't really talk about what I think intelligence is or what an AGI needs to be able to do, but learning, you use that word, I think is key to it. The system needs to be able to learn interactively, and part of learning is, of course, asking questions or hitting the books. That you get some piece of information and it's ambiguous or it's contradictory, and you need clarification. You need to drill in, and absolutely, an AGI system absolutely needs to be able to do that, is to identify gaps in its knowledge, contradictions, ambiguity, and have mechanisms for resolving those and filling them in. And we actually, in our own project, we have a list of 14 different ways in which our AGI needs to acquire knowledge. Yes, that is absolutely key.
Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, time is advancing here, so we have only probably just a few minutes left. Let me just ask you this: how do you view books like James Barrett's recent book about Our Final Invention, for example, which is very much supported by MIRI, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, in their claim that by definition, any AI which lacks the friendliness feature as part of its design would be a threat to humanity, perhaps an existential threat?
Right. So I certainly disagree strongly with the view that any AGI, any system that has human level intelligence, is inherently going to, lead to the destruction of humanity or whatever. I mean, that's certainly one of the stronger views that has been expressed, that of all the minds you can build, the chances of building a mind that will not destroy humanity, are tiny. I think that is nonsense. To me, the sort of paperclip arguments and those, I just find them quite ridiculous. And I think they've been debunked. Any system that has human level intelligence, by definition, will need to understand that no, we don't want the universe, converted into paperclips. So,
how do you prevent that? I mean, don't you feel like you might be working towards the end of the world in a way? According to those people's arguments, if you succeed, you might be a fundamental existential threat to humanity.
Right. So first of all, I as I mentioned now, I do not agree that an AI is inherently likely to destroy the world. So, that in fact, I have somewhat the opposite view, that it's much more likely to be inherently friendly. And I alluded to that earlier, where I said that there is a correlation, an important correlation between intelligence and morality.
Let's unpack that a little bit, because I don't understand it, perhaps.
Okay. I know whenever I have this debate, it's not one that is settled in 3 minutes or 5 minutes. But let me give you just sort of a taste of where, where I look for how presented. So I think by now most people in America believe that going to Iraq was not a good thing, was not moral, and wasn't very smart.
I hope so.
Yeah. So, however, I was shocked and surprised that at the time, Americans were almost, of both political persuasions, were almost unanimous in thinking it was a good idea, which I, So let's assume we have an AI that actually is rational, and we've come to respect its opinion because it's given us good advice. It's like an oracle, that we've asked it to give us good advice and told us, no, you better not get married here, or yes, you should get married, or you shouldn't invest in this scam, or, whatever. It's basically given us some good advice along the line. So we now ask this oracle, do we think it's a good idea that we go to Iraq? And it's available to many people. And it will tell us in many different ways why this is not a good idea. And it will also know what we're actually trying to achieve. Are we trying to secure our supply of oil? Is that what it is? That's the reason. Okay. And it might suggest other ways in which we can solve our energy problems because, it's smart and methodical and logical, and it can give us these reasons. Because doing immoral things are often things that are done for lack of knowledge or out of fear. And if you could have a rational, oracle, a rational system that can help you find better solutions to that, then that is also inherently a moral thing. So that's basically where I see the correlation between intelligence, having better solutions, being able to overcome your fear, that leads to better outcomes and therefore better morality.
Let me try to attack this a little bit here.
I'm not surprised.
Your key pivotal word that you use is often. So intelligence often would help us do that. And in this particular case that you mentioned, I would agree with you entirely. I would hope so that it would play out like this. And I would say it's probably plausible scenario. However, is it hard to deny that there are situations in which being evil pays out completely? And I can give you many examples, not like Iraq, but for example, let's say in colonial times, we go to a certain island where there's certain kind of natural resources. The difference between us and the local, quote, savages, end of quote, is, let's say, gargantuan in terms of technology and capabilities. So we have several options. One is to engage in trade, which they don't understand the concept of. Another is to simply exterminate them, and do that in the most efficient and effective manner. So I would like to propose to you that actually, if you have that kind of high intelligence and high capacity, yes, perhaps the quantity of your evil deeds would diminish as quantity, but the quality of those few ones where it would be the best, most optimal course of action with respect to accomplishing a certain goal would be so bad that the negative effect overall might be still negative. And it still would not be precluded from happening.
Right. So first of all, we would need to separate out whether we believe the AI has its own motivation, and I don't think we're talking about that case here. I think we're talking about the case where the AI does not have its own motivation, but where it advises us. And so, if it advised, say, a government or Bill Gates or somebody, well, evil Bill Gates. I don't know. Some people believe that.
I actually like him personally, but
yeah. So, but yeah, well, of course, he's a philanthropist now, so he's but anyway, let me not put a name on it, but let's say there's some billionaire who's evil and he has access to this AGI that'll give him advice. If there was such asymmetry, I certainly think that an AI could be used for negative things to some extent. But even there, and I do want to refer back to Ayn Rand, because she actually did an extremely, extremely good job at unpacking that. When people said, and she gave some very good examples of why it is not inherently good for yourself to be lying to people and to be cheating people. And I don't really have the time.
If you're the lion in the jungle, it doesn't matter. You can kill right. And do whatever you want.
Right, exactly. That's exactly the point. We are not lions in the jungle. You can't take that just at an abstract level. You have to take it for yourself. So imagine you can make your money by cheating people. And you have found some way of hacking into a bank and getting money. Will that lead you to happiness? Is that inherently compatible with human happiness? And the answer is no, it is not. Because what do people want? They also want to be respected in society. They want to have a family. They want to have, a life partner for most people. They want to have children for many people. So if you made your money that way, what kind of person are you going to be able to attract as your life partner? So either you're not going to tell them how you made your money, in which case, what kind of relationship do you have if you can't even talk about what you do for a living, as it were? Or you attract somebody who isn't, who you also can't trust, because if they think it's cool to just do people in, then, they're either just going to be a slave to you because you're so powerful, or it's somebody that you're never ever going to be able to trust because they think it's, it's just fine to rip somebody off. How do you tell your children what you do? How do you raise your children? How do you look yourself in the mirror?
Very easy. I mean, look at history. Like, people traded other people and were slave owners of thousands of people, and they created a hierarchical justification simply by saying those are savages. That's why I said that it has to have that discrepancy, ideological and philosophical discrepancy, right? That's why I said, I get the Ayn Rand argument within a certain context of, let's say, us here today in America. But
that's where we are. So
but that's not the world. The world is a lot more complicated than this, right? Look at Ukraine. Look at everywhere, right? There's a huge discrepancy of power.
But I mean, I'm sure you've also read the books on how everything is getting better. I mean, I actually just led a salon last Sunday where we spoke about that, and I had a stack of books and graphs and showing how really everything is getting better. I mean, and in every measure, obviously there are blips along the line, but I mean, you look at individual freedom, you look at democracy, you look at longevity, wealth, everything, and on every measure, humanity is moving in the right direction as a general trend.
That's a little bit different topic. My point here was that there are circumstances, as there have been historically circumstances, in which
Oh yes, sure.
It pays to be evil anymore.
In isolated cases, but I'm assuming that AGI technology, as it comes about, will be available to many people, and certainly that's something that I would push to achieve. It seems the natural way that it should help us, and it should help as many people as possible.
Well, Peter, I truly hope that that's the case, and I've actually kept you here longer than I promised I would. So let me ask you quickly the last two questions in the last 2 minutes. So first of all, what's the best place for people to find more about you and your work?
Just if you Google my name, you'll probably find it very quickly. Just Peter Voss, VOSS, and there's a bunch of different things. I'm also very interested in life extension, calorie restriction, and cryonics, and philosophy. I've written about free will, so if anybody's interested in that, I have a fairly lengthy article on that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, typically if you put a keyword in my name, and the chances are you'll get to it pretty quickly.
I would have to admit, I would love to have the unique opportunity to sit down with you one night over dinner or over a glass of wine and just have a 3 or 4 hour long discourse about many philosophical issues. I think it will be a fantastic event. But in the meantime, what's the most important message that you would like to leave us with today? The one single most important thing that we should take from this conversation with you today?
Well, I'm not into the sort of one-line advertising, really. Otherwise, I maybe would have taken a different career. But in intelligence and morality, that having more intelligence will be good for mankind.
Fantastic. Peter Voss, thank you very much for your time today.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. And yes, let's get together and have that debate sometime. Huh?
Looking forward to it.
Singularity.